Donald Trump's criminal trial, we cannot predict what the jury will do. If Donald Trump is indeed found guilty, the question is what happens next? And that is the question posed and answered by our next guest. Senior political reporter at Rolling Stone, Aswin Subsang, joins us now. And Swin, you write about how Trump and his allies plan to respond to his criminal cases if he is reelected. But what about a conviction? Like, just start us off there. What does that look like?
Sure. Well, it's not only if he's convicted, it's if he's convicted in, say, jurisdiction like Manhattan or in a state, because obviously a criminal trial is pending in Georgia. It's almost certainly not going to happen before the election year is over, but in theory, it could start in 2025. So just to back it up for a moment, if Donald Trump is reelected at the end of this year, he and his government in waiting have a sprawling plan for using the Justice Department to shut down criminal investigations that have been going into him on a federal level. So the two Jack Smith probes, if he's reelected, you can kiss goodbye to them. A problem for Donald Trump is that the criminal investigations going into him on a state level, he can't just pardon or use the DOJ in that situation to shut his way out of it. So what he has needed is a plan, an ideological MAGA blueprint for how to wield the federal government to help him get out of that bind. So in our reporting at Rolling Stone, what we found is that in recent months, he's been calling around to closely aligned lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Republican attorneys and other close associates and powerful Republicans to try to figure out what laws could potentially be passed if he has an opportunity to sign them again in 2025 or after. Different ideas have been kicked around. But first and foremost, perhaps, is this idea that he's now closely gravitated towards, which is, OK, we need to have the House and the Senate pass a law that makes it an option for former vice presidents or former presidents, wink, wink, Donald Trump, of the United States to have their criminal cases or civil cases moved from certain jurisdictions automatically to federal court. Now, the reason that kind of technicality or protocol would be important for a potential second Trump administration is it would give the Trump DOJ, the very thoroughly MAGA-fied DOJ, the opportunity to shut that down, which obviously they cannot do now in Manhattan, in Georgia, and in other places like that. So this is just
so basically what you're saying, Swin, is that he would not. You would not have state DAs, state prosecutors being able to bring criminal charges against former presidents. Is that what he's trying to do?
Well, you would be able to bring the cases, but then it would give a former president, when they no longer have the significant immunity and protections of the Oval Office, once they're out of office, having the option to move those investigations, or those trials, I should say, to federal court. So Trump is currently a former president, so he obviously does not have those protections in places like Georgia. But if he ever becomes president again, and if this law were ever passed, and if he signed it, he could move something like the Georgia probe to a federal court and then theoretically have it shut down. It's a little bit convoluted, but it is a potential get-out-jail-free card in such a situation.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. You can shut down the federal cases, and then you can actually consolidate the state cases and move them to the feds. I think they're constitutional challenges, but thanks so much, Swin, for being with us. Hope you come back again very soon. Anand, before I let you go, I wanted to follow up your question about what authoritarians do, or people who lean authoritarian, as far as creating this environment, creating this narrative. I'm curious. Different types of authoritarians, obviously, and there's a sliding scale. You have Vladimir Putin, who's very repressive and not quite as effective at it. I mean, he can get what he wants done, but it comes at a very heavy cost to himself, politically, to his country, to his economy, to his military. But let's talk about Modi, who is extraordinarily successful at doing this and explain. I mean, here's a man who is most people believe repressing Muslims, damaging democracy in India, and yet he's extraordinarily popular.
I think that's exactly right. You have to distinguish between the kind of electoral authoritarians and the non-electoral authoritarians, right? Vladimir Putin isn't worried about swing voters in provinces of Russia. That's not a problem he has. But you know, India under Modi is still, as we are in the United States, an electoral system with voter suppression issues, et cetera. But it's still a voting country where authoritarians need to win the vote. And there was a fascinating episode of The Daily, the New York Times podcast, a few weeks ago, explaining Modi's hold over India as India goes through these elections right now. And it described him as a kind of cultural omnipresence, right? He has a call-in radio show, and he's not always talking about politics on it. When students are in exam season at the end of the school year, he's just fielding phone calls from stressed out students who call him and are like, "Sir, can you give me advice about managing my exam stress?" And then he's sharing tips from his life as a tea seller turned politician turned prime minister about how to do that. And he has, of course, used those for authoritarian ends. And he is turning India into more of a Hindu monocultural state and an authoritarian state. But he has done it by being in the culture. And the Indian center-left opposition, the Indian movement parallel to the Democratic Party that is interested in pluralism, India as a country for all people. Frankly, I don't know, as someone who watches India, who speaks for it. I can't remember a speech they've given in recent years. So we have a very similar problem, and it's actually sometimes helpful to connect these dots because you get out of your silo. There is something in the modern media, social media environment that is favorable to authoritarians who understand that you have to help people see the world, right? And Joe Biden, but I would also say the opposition in India and many other places, don't understand their culture-making role. Don't understand that when people's kids are coming home saying, "I'm learning new things about American history," and that, you know, a parent is destabilized a little bit. That's normal, right? And if the authoritarian right is the only person explaining to you why American history is being taught in some new ways, and the pro-democracy side is not explaining that to you in a different frame. They're just talking about policies and infrastructure, whatever else. They're missing a lot of what's actually going on in our politics.
MSNBC political analyst and publisher of the newsletter The Ink, Anand Giridharadas, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. We appreciate your insights. And